Okay, hello again, everyone. Welcome to the first chapter. In this chapter, we are going to see some basic information, some introductory subjects about human biology in general, about science, about society. This will lay out the entire course and it will be fun. So let's start. So, in order to understand the human beings, we need to understand the life in general. And to understand life, uh, we need to see the characteristics of life. So, as signs of life, living things have different molecular composition than non-living things. While both the living things and non-living things share the same set of elements, living things form more and diverse molecules and compounds than non-living things. This is essential to sustain life. The second characteristic is that living things require energy and raw materials. Energy they needed to perform a lot of metabolism reactions to grow and to move. The raw materials, the energy is coming from basically the raw materials. We as a human or any living thing consume raw materials from nature, and within the body metabolism, within the body uh, chemical reactions, we convert these raw materials into substances that we can consume, we can use to produce energy. The third characteristic is that living things are composed of cells, and we are going to understand what are the cells later and what are the components of cells. Living things will maintain homeostasis. We are going to see homeostasis, and we will see a lot. We will see some basic um, feedbacks or regulations to maintain the homeostasis. But as a quick introductory into this word, homeostasis is the ability to maintain, excuse me, the ability to maintain a stable internal environment. Internal environment meaning that within the body of that living thing, so it is the ability to maintain that stable internal environment regardless the changes happening outside. A quick example, see for example, if it's hot outside, we sweat to reduce the temperature inside. If we touch something hot, we would withdraw our hand. That is also a way to maintain the homeostasis, not to disturb this internal environment. And that would lead us to the response to the external environment. So these changes happening outside our body, we are going to respond to them either to stay away from these changes or to minimize their effects in order to continue our life. The last essential characteristic of life is our ability to grow and reproduce. Of course, non living things cannot grow, cannot reproduce. Now, populations of living things evolve through time. A group of a human, for example, 1000 years ago are totally different than a group of a human living nowadays. So, all of these things are general characteristics of life. Now, when I move the slide to the next slide, there will be a video, there will be a sound. I need you to pause and watch that video and then come back and continue with my lecture.
While there
Okay, let's see now the classification. Oops, sorry. Let's see the classification of humans. How do we classify humans within the biological system? Now, to understand the classifications, think of it as a tree. There is main branch, then there is a sub-branch, sub-branch, sub-branches, sub-branches, all the way to the species, or think of them as the fruit. So our domain is eukarya. These are cells that their nucleus are contained or surrounded within a membrane. Then that is our domain. Then there is the kingdom, the animal kingdom. Then there is the phylum, which is the core data, that we have a dorsal spinal cord with the node that is our brain. Then the class, we are from the mammalia, that we have mammary gland to breastfeed our kids. Then our order is primates, our family are hominidia, and our genus is Homo, and our species is Homo sapiens. So the second smallest branch or unit is the genus, and the smallest branch would be the species. Now, for the species, it's like we can define them as one or more populations of organisms. They have similar physical and functional characteristics. They can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So in these terms, how do we as a human differ from other primates? We can stand upright and walk on two legs. That is something known bipedalism. Pia, it means two. Pedalism from the pedal, from the our Latin name of our foot. Then we have opposable thumbs. The opposable thumbs, that our on our right hand, the thumb is turning to the left. On our left hand, the thumb is turning to the right. This would enable us to grasp objects between the thumb and the tips of other fingers. We have large brain relative to the body size, and we have the capacity for language. We can talk and we can write, and therefore we can communicate. So these are, if we are comparing our hands with primate hands, for example, with the chimpanzee, you can see how we are adapted to touch or to hold tiny things, versus the chimpanzee barely can touch, a branch of a plant. So these things would enable us to develop and better equip with our life. Now, for biological organizations, we can think of it as a way to look at any biological system, or in general biological systems, and how they fit within each other. This helps us to understand the relationship between these biological and chemical systems. Now, here is a look on the many levels that we can study humans through. We can study them that through our cells, through tissues, through organs or organ systems or organisms, through populations, through communities, through ecosystem, or through biosphere, how their relationship with the earth in general. Now, notice that these levels from what are they? From the atoms, I missed the atoms. From the atoms and molecules, all the way to the organism, are happen to be within an individual a human body. And therefore, it is how the human body is built. Our body basically is coming as a result of atoms and molecules combined together. They formed cells. These cells came together and they formed tissues. These tissues came together and formed organs. Different organs formed organ systems, and different organs formed organ system, and different organ systems formed the organism or the human being. Whereas the levels from population to biosphere is concerned with the relationships between the organism, the human being individual or the human individual, and other organisms with their environment. So these, like, that is the population, that is the community, that's the ecosystem, that's the biosphere. All of these levels definitely include more than one organism. Okay, whereas from the atoms to the organism, it's all happening within one human body. Of course, the populations which are formed from organisms, now all of these organisms are made from the same composition of atoms, cells, tissues, organs, and so on. However, they are totally different organisms. although they are made out of the same basic structures. This is to show you how does this happening, starting again with atoms, molecules, to cells, tissues, organ system, and that is the individual organism which is living within a population, which is living, that population is living within a community, that community is living within an ecosystem, and the ecosystem or different ecosystems are forming the biosphere, and of course these biospheres includes the populations and the human beings or the individual human beings. This table define each one of these levels and brings some issues and controversies regarding each one of them. So please have a look on this table. Now, a core concept in studying and understanding human biology is to understand science and scientific method as a trustworthy way of generating and acquiring knowledge. So science in our understanding or in our course is a study of the natural world, and science is made out of two things. That knowledge is about the natural world, and second, the process used to acquire this knowledge, which is called the scientific method. So we want to gain knowledge about the natural world, and also that gaining of knowledge or that knowledge that being gained, it has to come through something called scientific method, and that is important. Now, what are the steps of scientific methods? There are different steps, and these steps are organized, and we will see how they are organized. But let's list them. The first one is observe and generalize, then formulate the hypothesis, then make a testable production, then experiment or observe, and we will understand why it's or observe, modify the hypothesis as necessary, and repeat. So these are the steps of scientific methods, and it's very important to know them and to understand them. Now, the first step, as we said, is observe and generalize, and this is coming from being outside in the world or being reading literature, reading scientific articles, and start to make these observations by your talk with patients, for example, or by talking with other scientists, by if you are studying certain animals, by observing them, and start making general idea or general statements about these behaviors or these observations. Now, this process should induce reasoning, that you want to understand why these observations are happening and why we can generalize them. So the second step would be formulate a hypothesis. And the hypothesis is something that would explain these observations based on our prior knowledge and based on our understanding of the previous knowledge and previous science. So formulate a hypothesis or a hypothesis would be our best guess on this observation. This hypothesis should lead us to make a testable prediction. So we need to predict that when something is happening, we are going to get A, for example, we are going to get P, for example, and so on. So we need to test this prediction. See, for example, if I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. That is a testable prediction. How I'm going to test it? I will make myself hungry and see, can I eat or no? I know this is like very simplifying of the concept, but this is how it's going to work. Then, once we make this prediction and it has to be testable, we will go and experiment it, either by doing a real experiment in the lab or outside, or observe. If we are talking about animals or we are talking about plants, we are going to observe them. Now, these experiments will come up with results. These results, either they are going to confirm our hypothesis or deny it. So we would modify our hypothesis and repeat the step again. Experiment and modify and repeat as necessary. As long as we are getting different answers or different explanations that we are not quite sure that this would be the true reason for our main observation, we need to keep repeating this step. And that is the beautiful side of scientific method, that it does not grant a knowledge unless it went through several steps of repetition, experimenting, observation, modifying, and so on. Once we are quite sure or we have some confidence in our results, we would go from here and share our data or publish them. And in general, the entire process of scientific method, it would increase our confidence in our hypothesis and would make sure that our hypothesis is going to work regardless the situations. Whether you are cold, if you are hungry, you are going to eat. Whether you are hot, if you are hot, you are hungry, you are going to eat. You are in the north, traveling, wherever you are, whenever you are hungry, you are going to eat. So that's the hypothesis, and that is how we are confident about its results.
The scientific method often
So this is a video that will explain, maybe with more details and some animation, the scientific method. So also please pause and watch it. Now these slides, basically what I have tried to explain, they are giving more direct examples. I'm not going to read them word by word. I believe they are pretty straightforward. So please go through them and read them and post any questions they might come or any ideas you might think of while you are reading them. Post them into the forum. Now, just understand, and this is something I did not talk about, which is how this tested hypothesis become a theory. So for a hypothesis to become a theory, it must be broad, very general, be extensively tested, be supported over time, which means over and over repetition of different experiments would lead to the same hypothesis or to the same explanation. Then it will explain a broad range of facts and have high degree of reliability, which means it has been repeated and tested by different scientists from different places around the world under different conditions and always proved to be true. Now, while this theory, it might be true for a certain period of time, sometimes it's 100 years, sometimes 200 years, sometimes even more, but it does not mean that theories will last forever. It's very often that theories would collapse and became wrong upon new discoveries, acquiring new knowledge, or gaining more understanding of a certain um, observation or a certain phenomenon. So, and that is again one of the things that are so beautiful about science, that always pushing you to understand more and come up with better answers for these phenomena. Now, for scientific information, and the sources of scientific information would vary in style and quality. So, not everything written in a scientific language would be a scientific information. Usually, we trust scientific information if it's coming in peer-reviewed journals. Peer-reviewed means that a group of scientists read that paper, read that research, and approved it. And usually they would go several cycles of asking the authors, asking the experimenters to do extra experiment to explain what's happening and why they get results. So we would trust these scientific information if they appeared in peer-reviewed journals. Also, a trusted source for scientific information are science magazines and nonfiction books. Also, general interest in news magazines, daily newspaper that we in general trust and believe that they have good source of news, and internet, which is not really a reliable source, depending on where you are looking at for this information. Some of these information are uh, on the internet are true, but many are not. Of course, you are not going to go to Instagram, for example, or Twitter or Facebook to search for certain facts or certain information, scientific information. So we would use internet with, you know, a lot of doubts about the information there. The same thing for the general interest in news magazines. If we know that a news magazine is not really a reliable source, so we would not trust it. But in general, these have a better credibility comparing to the general internet. And in general, I think you can classify them from the highest credible to the least credible sources of scientific information. Now, one major thing that will help you to well, I wanted to say to appreciate, but it's more than appreciate, to examine that type of information is to be a critical thinker. And lucky enough, being a critical thinker is something we can always learn and acquire. It's not something we're born with. So how to be a critical thinker? To become a skeptic. You would think twice or three times about any bit of information you are hearing. You will learn, or you need to learn, how to read the graphs. You will appreciate the value of statistics, and you will understand that statistics are very critical and important component of scientific literature and scientific information. You will distinguish between stories coming from or narratives coming from without credible source with them, and scientific evidence. Scientific evidence is usually supported by research and experiment and published in peer-reviewed journals, whereas these anecdotes are not. It's someone told me, I read it over the internet, so these are not really credible sources of scientific evidence. And of course, you need to separate facts from conclusions. Facts usually are, you know, very stable. They don't change. But conclusions, they might change based on the science itself. Science is changing, conclusions are going to change. You and I, we might read the same paragraph, but every one of us would conclude different things from it. So we need also to distinguish the facts from conclusions. And lastly, understand the differences between correlation and causation. If two things happening at the same time, it does not mean that they are correlated. It does mean that they are correlated, but it doesn't mean that one of them is leading to the other. Like a very funny example about this, that uh, beach or being at the beach is highly associated, or no, sorry, it was eating ice cream is highly associated with death. How is that happening? That is correlation, that eating ice cream is highly associated with death. But it does not mean that eating ice cream would lead to death. No. If we are thinking that when we are eating ice cream, we are eating it in summer, people go to beaches in summer, people do a lot of things in summer. They usually go out, they travel, they use their cars, they drive, they do a lot of adventures. Unfortunately, some of them will die. And that would increase the death rates. So in summer, eating ice cream would increase and also the death rate would increase. But the death rate is not coming from simply eating ice cream. No, because it's summer and there are a lot of people on the road, a lot of people traveling, a lot of people on beach, a lot of people on forests, climbing mountains and so on. So people kind of exposing themselves to different situations, and some of them unfortunately will die. That is the causation. This is the causation. But between the death, sorry, this is the causation. That death in summer, maybe summer is causing more death rate or increasing the death rate. But between the eating ice cream and death, that is just a correlation. It does not explain it. So thinking like this about any bit of evidence, any bit of information you are reading would help you to become a critical thinker and to understand and to distinguish between uh, scientific facts and just the stories told over the internet. Now, why science is important in society? Because it improves technology and improves the human condition. Think 100 years ago. Think of deaths associated with birth. It was extremely high. 100 years ago, average person would live around 35 years only. Now the life expectancy is around 75 to 80 years. That is because of science that improved the technology and improve the human condition. With that being said, we need to understand that science has limits. While science is aiming to answer all of the questions, all of the problems, but we are not yet there. There are some areas that science is still incapable of providing an answer. However, there are scientists working and trying hard to do this, but still, till they are there, we need to understand that science has limit. With that being said, with science has limit, it does not mean that we lose faith in science, because science helps us to make informed choices, to make us think logically, regardless of our emotions, regardless of the situations we are living within. Informed choices means usually better choices. And that is why science is important in our society. Okay, so this was the first chapter. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Please post your questions into the form, uh, either written or by the video as we discussed earlier, and see you in the lab and also in the next chapter.